Good morning, everyone. Today is a really special day for me. My very first guest on Alive is somebody that I've known for a very long time. I am honored to have Professor Hamamoto. He and I have been friends for a number of years, and he has been very gracious, having invited me on his show many times. So, what I want to do is turn to Professor Hamamoto and thank you for being here this morning. Let me see if they, since it's the first live, can you hear, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are there people in the chat room here?
Yeah, there are a lot of people in the chat room.
Okay, they're
Okay,
not
well, I think they can hear us. Okay, we're
good.
good. We're ready to go. So, Professor Hamamoto, I'm curious to know, and frankly, I'm sure the crowd is interested to know. Number one, some people are new. So, although most of the people in the live stream are familiar with you, would you be kind enough to do two things? First, introduce yourself to the crowd, and then let us know how you first became aware of the JE, and we're going to just call it situation.
Okay. Well, first, Miss Sommers, thank you very much for
Kirby.
inviting me here as the guest for your new show. I think it's going to rocket straight to the top, and it's just going to pass all the what we call the pop-up pundits. It's going to leave them in the dust, and I'm going to be so happy as that happens. So thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here with your highly informed audience because I am a subscriber to your Substack, and I read the comments, and they're very high level. This is far beyond most YouTube type material you see out there because, as most people have realized, the zone, so called, has been flooded by just a lot of diluting information, misinformation, and mostly non information. So that gets me to the earlier question as to how I became aware of you. It must have been on one of the more cutting edge podcasts, but somehow I found out about you and your work, and I knew you were a published author. So I just jumped on that and went to the retailer that ate the world, which carried all your books. And I have a couple of them right on my shelf. For some reason, I kept it right up front so I knew where to find it because I thought that the case would keep coming up again. So I didn't lose it. And let me just share with your audience the first books. Now I don't have the billionaire's girlfriend. Am I getting the title wrong?
Woman, and it's called an S slave.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Girlfriend is for someone that
I
you
don't.
have.
Yeah, I don't want to use the phrase because
It,
YouTube might be kind of weird about it.
right.
So and I won't pronounce any of these names. I'll just hold the book up. Is that okay to the
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. We
So
can
this
refer to that as JE. Yeah.
right, yeah. So and this is a long. It's over 400 pages long. If it's still in print, I'm not sure,
It
but
is.
it is okay. Still, definitely, if you're new to this, get this book because it still holds up. It was published back in 2021. It's 2025 now. It still holds up. There's more information as we're going to talk about today. But this convinced me that one, Kirby Sommers was a really good journalist. And as you read her autobiography, you know that she's coming at the topic from a unique perspective, sadly enough, from the inside out, where other people are just kind of looking at it from the outside in. And then and there are other books as well. She's written several books, but I'm just giving you a couple here. I won't pronounce her name on air, but here's
Oh, we can
another.
pronounce her name. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, by the way, you probably know this, but her people are trying to spring her out of prison, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk about that. So this is another book that let's see, when was it published? Quite a long time. See, Kirby Sommers has been in on this. She's not a newbie. For those of you who are newbies, she's been doing this for years and years. And you can assume that she was doing the research a long time before the actual publications. So from that point on, I started following anytime you came on to other people's shows, mostly YouTube, or if you published material and I read your Substacks, which were dropping 2, 3 times, 4 times a week, depending. And now you have a channel. So you have all the media, the major media covered, independent socials. And you're on Twitter too, right? Are you?
I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. I
Okay.
have a Patreon. I've had the YouTube channel now. I've been uploading information now regularly for a couple of months, but I've had the channel for at least, I'd say, 2 years. In
Oh,
fact, I
okay.
have a podcast going back 3 years around the time of Ghislaine Maxwell's trial.
Uh-huh.
And so I've been doing it, but I've been more consistent. And clearly, because of you and Sean Atwood, I learned about StreamYard, at which point I said, oh, let me look into this because I want to do a live too. And I've learned a lot from the both of you. So here
Mhm.
we are. So I'm curious to hear, Daryl, and we're friends. So you call me Kirby, I call you Daryl.
Absolutely.
Everybody else, you call him Professor Hamamoto.
What's that?
Okay. Okay. So, um, I was devastated when I heard the news that Virginia Roberts Giuffre, literally the most outspoken uh, victim and survivor of the JE network, by the way, people, that's how I have to reference it. It includes Jean-Luc Brunel, Ghislaine Maxwell, and a slew of other people. Uh, what were your thoughts when you heard that she was suddenly found unresponsive in her home in Australia?
I was shocked, but truthfully, I was not surprised. And from almost the beginning, there was a lot of conflicting information, and a lot of it has not even been cleared up yet. For example, she was said to have been a S word. Is that the proper word?
Mm-hmm.
Before anything else, how did whoever it was, and that's one of the big questions in the notes that I've seen from
Mm-hmm.
Sydney office of CNN. It says a family member said. They don't identify the source. Who is the so-called family member that declared her a S word, a victim? So from the very beginning, the story was muddled,
Well,
possibly intentionally.
I mean, just to give you a quick synopsis of her, she was born in California. At the age of 7, she was SA'd. So SA, what you would, what the, what that means, right?
Yes.
By either, and those reports are conflicting, either a family friend or
Mhm.
a relative, at which point she began to have issues with her mother. And at at the age of 14, she ran away. She had been in and out of foster care, by the way, and also in girls' homes where all we have to do to remember what happens in a child's institution is to think back to the Franklin case and Boys Town and what happens in those institutions from which she would run away. In fact, she did run away. And then at the age of 14, she found herself again on the streets. She was hungry. She didn't have any food. She's 14. She's not thinking logically. She's already a victim of having been abused at the tender age of 7, which fractures one's image of oneself and one's personality. She doesn't know much about surviving. She's sitting in you know on she's sitting on the street somewhere, and a limousine passes by, and the window rolls down, and it is a man by the name of Ron Eppinger. Ron Eppinger is the precursor for her in her lifetime of the JE situation, which will happen later at the age of 16. So Ron Eppinger takes her into the car where she is immediately surrounded by other little girls around her age. She's with him for 6 months until he is busted, at which point she is removed from that situation. She goes back into the fold of her family, mostly her father, Sky Roberts, who we really have, you know, to be very respectful of, and some people have not been. However, Sky Roberts is at that point working at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago in Florida, in Palm Beach. Sky Roberts says, you know what, I'm going to get you a job, a summer job at the age of 16. She's beginning to pull her life together. And she's like, yes, that's great. And so she begins as a towel girl in the summer at the age of 16. Ghislaine Maxwell and J.E. were regulars at the club. They only lived 5 minutes away from each other. J.E. had his mansion, which was raided years later in 2005, and Donald Trump had Mar-a-Lago, where he has it. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell procured her, we can say that word, from that place. She spotted her, she went in, she chatted her up. She had this British accent. She looked to Virginia to be a high-class woman and thought there was nothing wrong with her. And Ghislaine says to her, well, I have a very good friend. His name is Jeff, and he needs a massage therapist. And because she saw her reading a book on massage therapy, so she seized upon that, and it was actually a very good cover. And she invited her that very same afternoon to come to Jeff's house, only minutes away, where Virginia's dad drove her, unsuspecting. And Virginia would later find out during the course of that first visit what this was actually about. So that is the situation with Virginia and how she became embroiled in this horrific thing.
That seems to be, as you detail in your books and your blogs and your appearances, that seems to be the formula for these groomers, these finders, such as Ghislaine. In reading the literature about serial killers, serial murderers, and other type of people, they have this process whereby they bring certain targeted audience in. It could be young boys, teenagers, could be teenage girls. And then once they bring them into the circle, they in turn are used to bring others in. And in every step of the way, they test their boundaries. They find what type of limits they have, right? In the case of one of the victims, and I was reading this out of your book, I was going through some of the material there. This one girl in a situation similar to Virginia Roberts or Giuffre, however you want to identify her, said she didn't want to go so far as J.E. wanted to do. So she begged off. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what, if you want to earn $200, go out there and bring someone in here to meet me like yourself. So this is a formula, and I'm telling you this, the audience, you know this already, Kirby, but I'm telling the audience this. Hopefully someone might be part of the so-called child protective system, or in the police, or just a parent, a relative. You should learn from these stories that are coming out, as sordid as they are, some lessons about how these people operate. Information and knowledge is our best protection against this type of criminality expanding or moving ahead or even existing. So we have to be able to train ourselves in pattern detection. And what I really appreciate about your work, Kirby, your contributions, is that you consistently are able to show the structural relationship between seemingly unrelated events. You already alluded to one just a moment ago, the Franklin scandal, right?
Yes, they're all connected.
Instead of treating them as one-offs or as standalones, you are telling us that this is part of a larger overarching system.
Yes, in fact, someone, and I don't mean to interrupt, but don't let me forget this. We will be
Please.
talking about all of her attorneys, not just Carrie Loudon, who she hired in January in Australia, who I'm going to update everyone as to what she just recently said. Yes, thank you. But J. Stanley Pottinger, who by the way passed away in November,
Oh.
Thanksgiving, and the obituaries hardly mentioned that he was representing, and I'm using that word in quotes,
Mhm, mhm,
victims of JE. However, during his very long career with the intelligence apparatus of the United States, he was brought in by a person who was connected to Craig Spence of the Franklin case. And so no one has even discussed that part. But
mhm.
these men, and we'll get into it in our conversation, but and we'll get into all of the attorneys and all of that stuff. But were you aware, for example, that Virginia was experiencing two things? And if I need to remind you, don't worry, I will.
Mhm.
First, that she was a victim of domestic violence. And the second, as to, well, let's just go with the first one.
I was not aware that she was being brutalized by her husband until I saw that photo of her bruised person. And this is when that information first came to my awareness. I just assumed that she had moved over to Australia, started a family, found a man, and lived somewhat happily ever after outside the glare of all the publicity. But as it turns out, she was in a living hell.
Yeah, she was. So what I'm going to do, I sent you earlier today the same. Um, I I, I sent I sent this to Sean when I was on his show, and I
Mhm.
sent this earlier to you today. And what this is from the 2015 deposition taken from Alan Dershowitz because she was involved in 2015 in a defamation lawsuit with Dershowitz. And I'm going to frankly read a portion of this to the audience and to you. Did you have a chance to read it, by the way?
Yes, I did, but go ahead and read that.
Okay. So the document reads, and again, 2015, basically at a time where she is just beginning to be represented by David Boies and J. Stanley Pottinger and everyone that we have been looking at. So this document reads, an interview with ABC had to be postponed because her husband, Virginia Roberts' husband, had beaten her up so badly that she was hospitalized and that she could not appear on television with the bruises because she didn't want to have to explain that her husband had beaten her up. And I
Mhm.
ultimately corroborated that information as well by investigating the fact that she, in fact, filed a complaint against her husband and had been hospitalized. So everything that Rebecca told me has proved to be absolutely true and absolutely corroborated, and therefore I believe it, and I believe that your clients were engaged in what I believe is an extortion plot against Leslie Wexner, conspiracy to commit extortion, in which I was a victim as well as Leslie Wexner of being a victim. Now, aside from the fact that that is a comment by Alan Dershowitz, the fact
Mhm.
remains that it was known to her attorneys that she was in fact being beaten, and now it's known to the world that while she was bravely standing up to what is probably the most infamous case of our time, a spy case, no less, right? A
Mhm.
spy case, no less, crossing many country borders, because we have to remember this guy, right? We have to remember that guy.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Regrettably, we have to remember that guy. Um, but it does beg the question, why do you think that David Boies, Bradley Edwards, and J. Stanley Pottinger allowed her, instead of saying to her, don't put up a brave front, which is really what I would expect my attorney to do for me, but they waited. They knew, and they waited for her bruises on her face to disappear, and pushed her to show a brave front to the world, which tragically ended in her no longer being with us. And attached to that is something you and I were discussing earlier today, and those are the COINTELPRO tactics used against whistleblowers. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
You probably saw it as I did, and probably hundreds of thousands of people, that her ex-attorney, David Boies, who you've already mentioned, he was working with Stanley Pottinger, appeared on, I guess it might have been CNN, it might have been with Piers Morgan, I can't remember who it was, but he went on air. He's a really good actor. I'm talking about David Boies. And he expressed his heartfelt sorrow for what happened, but he was also implying that he knew nothing about the torment that his client, who probably told him in confidence and say, hey, do you have a client attorney privilege, a lot more about what was going on in her life that we as the public were allowed to know. But he distanced himself by instead pretending that he was really sorry that Virginia Roberts or Giuffre did not get help. He says, I just feel kind of bad, kind of guilty that I did not, or we did not, her family did not help her in her hour of need. But the way I'm looking at it is that he contributed to the situation. And I don't know where you're going with this, Kirby, but I think that's part of his function in the whole scenario, him and Stanley Pottinger.
Yes, in fact, the show that he was on, and I was cringed the whole time I watched it, was with Piers Morgan, who
It's
I,
cringe.
yes, and am showing a photograph of Piers with his good friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who you so rightly pointed out is currently trying to get out of jail. Although now, with the added publicity, bad publicity, that is, because the public is outraged. Everyone is outraged that she's gone and that this happened. But clearly, we know that David Boies uh, lied, because he was already in Virginia's life in 2015 when this happened with Alan Dershowitz. And this is here. This is part of a deposition that David Boies has and had at the time. However, I just think that they really, they look, we know, for example, that we have had people come around and sort of be gatekeepers, or people who clean up after the scene of a crime. But
Mhm.
clean up in the sense that they are gatekeepers, and they are, they're great with distractions, and they're great with lying, and and so that is kind of why I went back to the fact that J. Stanley Pottinger, who in Bradley Edwards' book, by the way, uh, page 189, it's called Relentless Pursuit. Bradley Edwards, I believe, because he was not anyone who wrote books previous to this being part of the victims of JE. And we do know that at some point, J. Stanley Pottinger, whom David Boies refers to as his private 007,
Mhm.
well, and he became an author of books, getting as much as $500,000 for his very first book, and I believe that's the one. $500,000. He had never written a book before, and then suddenly he's an author. Well, he's a lot. I am going to call him a deep state asset, which is really what he is. He covered up for uh, the Martin Luther King murder, concluding that's just one of the many things he has done, concluding that there was just a lone assassin, and where have we heard that before? However, yeah, I mean, J. Stanley Pottinger has a really long history of not being a good guy, in addition to which I should remind the audience that David Boies was the attorney for Bill and Hillary Clinton, against whom, I'd like to add, one or more of the JE victims that they represented had actual evidence to submit to what they believed was an actual investigation and an actual case, and that they were actually being represented by these men who called themselves their attorneys. However, it was not disclosed, which automatically, in my opinion, should disqualify them from being part of this case. And David Boies was also the attorney for Harvey Weinstein, and also the attorney for Elizabeth Holmes. Remember Elizabeth Holmes?
Oh yes, the blood testing operation out in Stanford area.
Yeah, so
Right.
that here we have J. Stanley Pottinger with Gloria Steinem, the faux feminist who is, there's enough evidence to know that she was part of CIA from the very beginning, and
She
that
admits
Ms.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that Ms. Magazine was in fact funded by a very good friend of not only JE, but also of David Boies, and frankly my own abuser, namely Mort Zuckerman,
Hmm.
with whom Epstein, or I should have said JE, was in partnerships to acquire New York Magazine. This is a very cozy family, but with your background in film and all of that stuff,
Hmm.
don't you see that the even just with this photograph with Pottinger, Deep State, Gloria Steinem, both CIA, right, faux feminists, derailing the, let's call it the women's liberation movement that was
Is that
derailed.
Marlo Thomas?
And yes, yes, and that was going to be my question to you. Don't you?
Oh,
So we see Hollywood, we see television, we see Phil Donahue, we see the relationship in this one photograph of the deep state assets with their propaganda. What's your take on that?
well, Kirby, we can do a deep semiological analysis of this photo. It's perfect. And I'm so disappointed that Phil Donahue, who is the native son of the Midwest, who later went New York mainstream, and he hooked up with this sort of television sitcom synthetic feminist called Marlo Thomas, the daughter of Danny Thomas, who people of my age remember from the Danny Thomas Show. It was a sitcom, right? They're Lebanese, by the way. Thomas is an Anglicization. They're Lebanese Catholics. And she was supposed to be a pop culture television I wrote a book on sitcoms back in '89, by the way. It's called Nervous Laughter. So I'm considered an expert in the field, and I've written about her in specific. That's why I was able to identify her so quickly. And that's why I know the backstory of her entertainment family, including Danny Thomas. Well, anyway, the producers, the people who ran CBS, and you've talked about William Paley of CBS and some of your Substacks and some of your talks, and so I don't need to go over that again for people who follow you closely. But on CBS, she was the representative of the Steinem psyop, I guess you can call it, and putting
Yes.
feminism into the larger pop culture via the boob tube, the
Yeah,
TV
yeah.
sitcom, and I knew that this was a mind, you know what, F that was taking place at the highest corporate levels. And I was
Yeah.
writing about this back in the 80s.
And we see the connection here between the intelligence apparatus and the other arm of the intelligence, which is Hollywood and television. And
CBS, yes.
yeah,
Well,
that's true.
ABC
And
and CBS and
all of them, I mean,
all of them.
remember, and by the way, Pottinger had also had a very big role in diluting information during the church committee hearings. But, I mean, we probably need to do another show just on analyzing all of black ops that were perpetrated by J. Stanley Pottinger,
Mhm.
including this black op. Okay, but
But before you go on,
yeah,
you've already alluded 2 or 3 times to a really important set of interlocking institutions that are contributing to this, again, system of abuse, exploitation, and predation, largely targeting women in the name of liberation, no doubt, right, and freedom. And that is the publishing business, right? Morty
yes,
Zuckerman, magazine man,
yep,
the fashion people, Jean-Luc Brunel, and all that. One of the people that I've been following very carefully is who I believe is a British intelligence asset, because this is an Anglo-American operation here that goes back to the dark days of World War II with the OSS and MI5, Ian Fleming, uh, the man called Intrepid, Stevenson, all that, Dulles, you name it, up to William Paley. But the person who was right now still in the catbird seat, presiding over the British part of the Anglo-American publishing psyop, pimping out impressionable young women with stars in their eyes, prospective models. Perhaps they're going to marry a rock star if they play their cards right, is none other than Anna Wintour.
yeah. Good point. Good point.
She's the
Absolutely.
head of Condé Nast Publications, and we know her as the editor for Vogue. And she was kind of given a little bit of a ironic tweak with The Devil Wears Prada, which was first a clever novel, then made into a really great film starring Meryl Streep. But she's much, much more than that. So please, ladies and gentlemen, study Chili Nuclear Wintour. Her father, by the way, was a British publishing maven, a magnate. His name was William Wintour, and he was so cold, so ruthless. He was like one of Smiley's people, John Le Carre, Cold War spy, that his own people called William Wintour, they called him Chilly Willy.
Yeah. So
Ruthless.
I want to know if you are familiar with this woman who has been trolling Virginia for a number of years, and she too appeared on Piers Morgan. And sadly, Sky Roberts, Virginia's father, was invited on the show. He didn't know who this vile creature was, or that
Right.
Piers Morgan had was friendly with Ghislaine Maxwell and the whole group that actually are formed this very tight knit circle. You know, they're all
Mhm.
part of it in one way or another. Were you aware of this Victoria Harvey?
I was only aware of her being on the periphery thanks to your work, but now she's come forward and being put into the foreground. So what Kirby, what's her backstory there? I mean,
Well,
what is
she is
she
the
getting out of
daughter.
this?
Well, she's the daughter of a jewelry, a very famous, actually, a jewelry theft. I can't speak. I think I probably need some water. But the Pink Panther movies, they're
Yes.
kind of based on his all of the illegal things that he did. He was thrown into jail. He was a man of ill repute. I mean, and she is the daughter of that. She is the product of that. Now
Oh.
she reached out to me. I believe it was 3 years ago when I was still very much involved with Virginia. So this is where it's going to lead us. It is going to lead us into COINTELPRO problems because J. Stanley Pottinger was very much involved in all these COINTELPRO things. So she contacted me via DM because she had noticed that myself and Maria Farmer had a public falling out, which I now realize was part of this COINTELPRO program to separate everyone and have us all fighting against each other, which, if you still go on some of the women's social media accounts, you will see that there is still friction between the victims who initially stepped forward as a group to quote, take this down, because at the time they only thought it was one ring. Virginia later, weeks before her life ended, made the discovery that it was a lot bigger. In fact, she too had been receiving my newsletter. Okay. So she contacted me via DM before Elon Musk took down my original Twitter account. And she said to me, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have her quote in front of me right now, that if I had any dirt, she called it diet. If you look at her, she's real thin. Diet on either Maria or Virginia, because it was her contention that this photograph of her very good friend Prince Andrew, whom she had a hookup with, was not really her girlfriend or anything, was quote fake. And that, so I ignored her because I ignore pretty much everyone, other unless, number one, it's for my safety. Two, if somebody is trying to get me in on some ridiculous thing, I know that a photograph is real. In fact, I made all the information, including the additional documents where JE is being deposed, asking whether or not he took the photograph. um, I made that free on my newsletter. However, she's been on a mission to discredit Virginia. I answered her after her second attempt to get me involved in some nefarious thing to quote, prove that Virginia was lying and prove that she never had anything to do with Andrew. And we all know that that is a bunch of nonsense. However, I posted immediately on my Twitter the second time she contacted me that I'm not going to help you with that fat FUCK. Uh, and that, so it was a couple of newspapers in the UK who then wrote about it the following day, because during that time they would either steal my information from my Twitter account, because I thought I lived in a free country then, and I thought speech was, well, we had freedom of speech. I've learned differently. However, they covered the story, and what did she do? She immediately deleted her account on X, and she, said, "Oh, I never contacted Kirby Sommers. It must have been my assistant." Well, we now know that she has been on a years long crusade um, for, and now that she's with Kash Patel. And by the way, I just want you to see this picture of her sucking up to Sean Puffy Combs, who's today they're beginning selecting the jury. His trial surprisingly is going to be on time, and there's going to start next week after they select the jury. So that's the crowd that she rolls in. I mean, don't you think that she's also an asset of the deep state, and also part of what I suspect is a COINTELPRO program against Virginia to get her to the point where she is so destabilized that it ended up with her somehow being unalived on the 25th of April, to the shock of everyone.
Well, again, my question is, what is her true deep backstory? Is she an asset? What does she get out of this? She's not getting any money to appear on Piers Morgan to make her accusations. Is she working for intelligence, do you think?
Well, I mean, she does get, it might surprise you, but she charges for her television her appearances on all these shows. That's how
See, I
she
didn't
makes
know
money.
that. Yeah.
Yes, that's how while she has half brothers, one of whom committed unalivement, and both of whom had substance issues. She refers to herself in her early days as a quote model. We all know where that probably what that means. However, we can see, let's say, so we're looking at a photograph of Sean Puffy Combs, who we now know was trained by Clive Davis and others, right?
Right.
And he too, I'm going to say, he's a deep state asset, right? Trying to convince a certain culture, a certain demographic
Mhm.
to debase themselves, right? In much the same way as Gloria Steinem harmed the movement and created this divide within the family unit so that the children were left without any parents. And then the mothers, Marlo Thomas, created this world where it was the thing to go and leave your family and go start a career. Marlo Thomas was at the head of that. And by the way, her father, Danny Thomas, just FYI, has been accused by a woman who wrote a book. There's Kathy O'Brien, whom you're aware of. There are several other women who have written books similar to Kathy O'Brien, and her name is escaping me, but it'll come back. And she wrote a book saying that Danny Thomas was her abuser.
Oh my gosh.
This is so that who is she? I would have to think that she has access to the uh, new director of the FBI, Kash Patel.
Hmm.
That well, I believe that she's being paid by several places. I believe she wants Ghislaine to be freed from jail. That's the agenda. Wants
Okay.
Prince Andrew not to be um, talked about anymore. Well, I think it's a little too late. I think that that ship has sailed. He has he's forever besmirched. And she gets paid from a variety of sources. But remember, when there are assets, as in the case of JE, which I talk about endlessly, there are layers. So the CIA and Mossad and MI5 and any of the intelligence agencies within what I call the 6 eyes, right? Because typically there were 5 eyes, but because of the state of the letter I say 6 eyes. They all create layers. So, for example, um, when MK Ultra was being performed at all of those colleges, and it was finally revealed and there was a long list of not just hospitals, not just prisons, but universities across the United States, for example. And the list at the time was about 87 approx institutions. Those institutions did not know, for the most part, where the money came from. So that these things have layers. So does she know that she's being paid by intelligence? I don't know because I'm not her and I don't have access to any real documents. But if she is on, she's no better than I'm going to say David Boies, and no better than this woman. Look at her making. What does that remind you of? This?
That's Crowleyan, isn't it?
Yeah,
Aleister Crowley?
yeah. They're all part of it. They're all
Yeah.
part of it.
It's
They're all
part of the
part of it.
Luciferian cult.
Yeah, and that's what this woman is. So, do you think that she was put into play because she began with hardly any followers, and since the 3 years that she contacted me initially, she's amassed a very large following. But the
Hmm.
people who quote follow her and continue to say derogatory things about Virginia are the same people that I told Virginia, hey, block that one, because their energy was off and they were already victim shaming and they were already in some unusual way trying to take the spotlight and run with it. And Virginia, she was being beaten up on a regular basis, apparently, at the time, right? We've seen the deposition of Alan Dershowitz in 2015. She's being shown to the public as the face of a very, very giant monster. I think that she clearly didn't have an idea of what she was up against. She
Hmm.
began to learn more, it's my understanding, before her death, but she was in the middle of an FBI lawsuit with approximately 11 other women. And then she, from one day to the next, she's gone. So, I mean, I just immediately thought, you know so much about COINTELPRO that you're the guy to explain what that is to the people, how it was used against Martin Luther King, how it was used against the Panthers, how it's been used against people like Virginia.
Hmm.
And, remember the actress Jean Seberg who created this relationship with the Panthers? Well, she
Yes, I
was
do.
targeted. And so,
Mhm.
can you explain to everyone what that is?
Well, under the original and longtime FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, they concocted a program that uses the acronym COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program, in order to subvert challenges to the secret state, right? And this was at the height of the civil rights movement, later followed by the real women's movement, not the fake one that Gloria Steinem helped to hijack. And this is during the height of anti-war Vietnam War, and Vietnamese people call it the American War, the height of anti-war protests. So they concocted all these different scenarios. Because remember, these intelligence people are men, and more recently, women of letters. They think of themselves as poets. They think of themselves as novelists, and many of them do find their way into print, which, by the way, is one of the ways they're being paid off. Right? They get
Right.
these giant $500,000 contracts for books that no one will read except for me. But I got it
Yeah.
on sale for $1.99 as a cut,
Oh,
as a,
good.
as a remain. No, I'm Kirby. I'm not going to pay $20 for this. Are you kidding me?
Exactly.
I bought it used,
Exactly.
but he doesn't care because that's the way the presidents after they retire, they go on these book tours. No one read the biographies of Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. That's the way of a sort of a retroactive bribe. So again, the publishing industry is very much with us. New media, yes, but print media is still king so far as disinformation is concerned. Now that you mentioned this one, Victoria Harvey, getting paid for media. I've been on media, national media, all kinds of media. I've never once gotten a penny from it. So that's news to me. I'm going to start charging. But she's probably getting paid by the Daily Express or some of the British publications, as far as I know.
Not to
She,
mention Prince Andrew's people, and not to mention Ghislaine
of course.
Maxwell's people, and the people above, you know, because Ghislaine is still not, she wasn't, let's say, the top person. There's someone,
Mhm.
there's a group above her. So
Let
those
me
people.
let me pause at this point. What specifically do you mean by the above? Who are they? I have some ideas. I just want to run them by you, but let me hear
Well,
what your suspicions are.
I'm not, because I'm in the middle of writing that on my
Oh,
Substack and it hasn't fallen yet. So that would be sort of destroying my entire research in 1 second. And I'm
okay.
still, but it's very, if one has been really following this story the way I have for even before I became involved with this in 2019, because I mean, I was just trying to figure out what was happening to me. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is
Yeah.
interconnected. And that's why I became friendly with Virginia and some of the other women and helped them behind the
Mhm.
scenes. But again, as far as, so there is an apparatus. I mean, we know there's an apparatus. Number one, uh, JE, it early in, as early as the well, you read my one of my recent Substacks that he had met Jimmy Goldsmith, who is a known MI5 asset uh, in the early 1970s before he began at Dalton. And so
Mhm.
he has also stayed at Epstein, JE, in my own show, I mess it up, uh, early in the 1980s, when he was at Bear Stearns, that he was one of his clients was Queen Elizabeth. Now, I've also shared information about Queen Elizabeth having an unusual store in Times Square on
Yes.
my, okay. But so there are layers of just very twisted parties. I think that we all know that the current king King Charles had a very long relationship with Jimmy Savile. So this is not a new situation. There you go. There you
This
go.
is our friend and colleague,
Yeah,
John Atwood.
yeah. So that, but was Jimmy Savile like J.E. or let's say like Craig Spence or like Larry King or like John David Norman or like everyone before them, and in fact it's ongoing today. They weren't, quote, the boss.
Hmm.
They were helped by intelligence, who in fact has another layer on top, and that layer does include, for example, the Bush family. Okay, and Pam Bondi, whose photo I don't have here. Pam Bondi was endorsed by Jeb Bush,
Hmm.
who was the attorney. He was the governor, I think, yes, during the time of J.E.'s early situation, which prompted Alexander Acosta to sign a non-prosecution agreement because he was told to stand down, that he belonged to intelligence. So we have all of this stuff and all of, there's just so much that not just tarnish the victim, which is a playbook, right? But this is an intelligence operation. So to not look at, let's say, this woman as being part of an intelligence operation,
Hmm.
I think would just be, you know, we would be remiss not to see her as part of, let's say, a COINTELPRO program to smear her, slander her, upset her, which she did, troll her to death, because the whole thing is to discredit a person. I mean, Martin Luther King's wife received anonymous letters telling her that her husband was having an affair and, frankly, urging Martin Luther King to commit unalivement. So I just see this as a playbook, and it just looks too similar to the FBI's tactics back in the day, which I do not believe ever ended.
Yeah, that story is from a book by Anthony Sommers, the one that
Yes.
deals with Martin Luther King Jr. and the harassment, the tape sent to his wife, so on. That's another example of COINTELPRO, as you alluded to.
I mean, do you
Now,
find it strange that she has this photo with Kash Patel, who is now the FBI guy, and we're supposed to be really believing that we're going to get, quote, a second set of documents?
well, it makes me wonder about Kash Patel, but going back to an earlier theme that accidentally arose about when you flashed Marlo Thomas, I went back into my childhood watching the sitcoms Make Room for Daddy and all the dreck that we were treated to. Thank you, Mr. William Cigar King Paley, right, of CBS
Yeah,
OSS, right?
right.
So we're getting another rerun of a famous television show of the late 70s and 80s, but this time it's called Donnie's Angels. And that includes Tulsi Gabbard, Christy Nome, and Pam Bondi. Those are Donnie's Angels.
Oh, yeah, good point.
It follows a television scenario. We're getting
Good point.
repeats, reruns. This is a giant situation comedy, and the laugh track is on us.
Good point. So I want to talk about something. We know that J.P. Morgan, the bank, settled with the victims, and I'm going to get the amount right now. Just give me 1 second to find the amount that the settlement that J.P. Morgan made to the victims. So let's see. J.P. Morgan, where are you?
So did the top dog at JP Morgan sign off on this, Jamie Dimon?
Yeah, Jamie Dimon wanted this to go away. He made it go away because clearly he could not be deposed.
Mhm.
But so let me just, okay, so just days before the arrest of J.E. on, and so J.E., for those of you who don't remember, he was arrested on July 6th of 2019, but days before, on July 4th, um, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania announced that it had issued a warrant to take custody of a ship owned by J.P. Morgan Chase, uh, which had nearly 20 tons of white on board. On board. Uh,
This is the Peruvian marching powder.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So this vessel, of which I'm sharing a photo, it was seized. Let's see. So the backroom arrangements were made on the 4th of July. It was seized on July 10th, 4 days after J.E.'s arrest. Now, they clearly were sued by the victims of J.E., and they settled. Um, they settled the lawsuit because apparently during the years of 2006 and 2008, J.P. Morgan Chase contacted the federal government, according to them, regarding some of J.E.'s transactions. Regarding, there was a lawsuit by the victims, about 12 victims who identified themselves only as Jane Doe, but one of them was Virginia. And that, and in their lawsuit, they alleged that J.P. Morgan Chase had to know, and that the money that J.E. was, let's say, using from the bank, they were aware of that this was coming out of the accounts related to human transportation. However, this was concealed. So J.P. Morgan Chase settled with a very significant settlement amount of $75 million to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and also settled with the Epstein victims. So, I mean, we have. So I guess the point I'm making is that you know a lot about the Silk Road and about what was happening with the Silk Road, and frankly, that continued, as we can see with this photograph of this seizing all these tons of like white belonging on a boat belonging to J.P. Morgan, against whom, let's say, someone like Virginia, very outspoken. Did her attorneys explain to her? No, that she was up against such a Goliath, meaning an asset of the state, I'm going to call it, the banking institutions. We know about BCCI, for example, the Bank of Credit and Commerce, which was a vehicle for the intelligence apparatus to launder their funds. No one has really looked at the JE connection to this kind of transportation. They've only looked at the surface, which was of persons, right? They haven't looked at minors, although really young children, although it is, other countries have written about victims who have attempted to retrieve money from the JE Victims Compensation Fund, which oddly enough, David Boies wrote, come on, with the caveat that if they accept the money, they had to drop the lawsuits against their perpetrators. So I mean, there was just so many moving parts, and there continue to be so many moving parts. And then, she's found not to be alive, and she's there with Queen Elizabeth II's most favorite child, Prince Andrew. And we know about the Silk Road and why Vietnam was even a thing to begin with, and how that continues to pour into our country. And I'm just curious to know if I mean, what are your thoughts with what I just shared? I just shared a lot.
Well, there's one part of the equation that needs to be grappled with if this system is to be even partially curtailed. And once Cash Patel and Pam Bondi and the rest of the Charlies or Donnie's Angels go after it, we'll know that their reforms and their motivations are pure, right? Until then, nothing's going to happen. But let me recommend, since we're trying to learn all together, right, piece by piece, and the learning curve, fortunately, is accelerating. Haven't you found since 2020, since you first started publishing this material, that there's been a huge acceleration of public knowledge and awareness, right? Which you have contributed to. You're one of the seminal figures who have brought the general public to this new level of education. So, toward that end, I recommend everybody pick up a copy of this book. It's called Laundromat. It's by Jake Bernstein, and it's about how all those great illicit profits of the millions and billions of dollars, how they are processed not through a road, but through a waterway that connects. They're called the Panama Papers, or they were
Right.
originally. Now, that is the Rosetta Stone of this whole system that we're talking about. The people that control that, who have offshored their private wealth, and a lot of them are royals, economic royals or hereditary royals, have offshored their wealth, leaving us, we little people at home, holding the bag,
Yeah.
right? This
Yeah.
is these are these giant multinational corporations, and I'm sure David Boies and all the top attorneys, they know about this. Most of their assets are
Of
probably
course.
there as well.
Yes.
So this is really the linchpin of the system, and there are many good. Fortunately, there's many good documentaries available on TubeView for you to watch and educate yourself about where all this money's going. So if Cash Patel starts making noises about tracking down these illicit profits, then we'll know that they are sincere, that Charlie's Angels are sincere in bringing down this edifice that has corrupted every single corner of American society, the economy, the education system, the medical system, all of it is because of this money laundering machine that was set up by some very clever international attorneys.
Well, yeah, I mean, generation after generation after generation after generation, that's what's been going on. Um,
Mhm.
I'd like to ask your opinion. So, I have been quite distressed knowing that Virginia is not with us any longer. And initially, I sort of thought, oh, okay, they're saying that she did it herself, right? And then other things came to the surface, and I'm thinking, oh no, maybe they got to her. I just, where do you land on that spectrum?
Well, I come on to the just based on historical precedent and incidents that have unfolded in the recent past and in going back decades. We all know about the so-called Clinton death list, for example.
Yeah,
There's a lot of material on that. I think that the case of Virginia Giuffre falls into that category,
yeah,
right, of unalivement. And I think that she was not really going to shut up, even with the settlement, whatever non-disclosure agreements she signed, whatever lawsuits she promised not to file, she was still going to be serving as an advocate for current and future victims. And there's only one way to deal with a person like that, and that's to put them into permanent silence. Now, I know Kirby initially you thought that she perhaps was she died in her own hands, but I wanted to find out what if I may ask this indelicate question, what is your current thinking on that question?
Well, my current thinking is that I mean, I've been very emotional about this. So, one of her friends, I've been receiving all kinds of stuff from a lot of the JE victims who are women now and who are, some of them are married, some of them are mothers, some are even grandmothers. But among the information that I have heard is that she met with Virginia not too long ago, and that Virginia had made some discoveries, and that she had, in fact, decimated information to other people that she trusted across the globe. So she had, I guess, what you call a dead man's switch.
Oh, mhm.
And that makes me believe that Virginia was fearful for her life. And this is just, they met, I'm trying to remember what month, but it was not long before Virginia suddenly had this very unusual series that she has an accident, she's in the hospital, she's very bruised, and then suddenly she's sent home, she's released. She's supposed to be suicidal, but somehow she's released from the hospital and allowed to go home. Typically, if somebody is exhibiting that kind of behavior, they're put into a psychiatric institution and they're watched for a couple of days, because some of JE's victims, in fact, have been in psychiatric institutions because they have attempted this in the past and not been successful. So we have their stories, okay? And so that Virginia sending out information as a dead man's switch to several people that she trusted across the country now makes me believe there is serious foul play. That said,
Well,
Sean Atwood has a very interesting theory that I sort of, you know, that is the reason that I really wanted to talk about the COINTELPRO. And his theory is that certain things are put into place to force an individual to, sort of meet, have these, and I'm not saying it as eloquently as he, and I'm paraphrasing, to have certain obstacles placed in their way that would change their way of thinking, which clearly was being done to Virginia. We can see that when we look at Victoria Harvey's role and the media's role in trying to uh, sort of make her look as if she had not been forthcoming, which she was, which ultimately led to her being so in a state of such depression that she had lost her kids. Now she's forced into the family court system, which we know is controlled by the deep state, because if they want to get at someone, what do? They break up the family, they take away your kids. So now she's caught into the system that she exposed. She perhaps didn't know that the family court system in any country is used as a way to silence you. Okay, there are many ways to silence her. So now they have her trapped into the system. So the way that Sean explains it makes me think, and then, but then, someone else who has been a researcher of this case for a long time is Ryan Dawson. And he says that there was an empty bottle of pills, and she was taking pain medications for a long time. And in fact, I know that JE put her on a lot of substances back in the day, and apparently she's had a lot of surgeries. And so, where do one day I think she could not have possibly have done this, and the next day I think they pushed all the right buttons into making her do it, and the next day I think, wait a minute, she's in this house her brother and his wife were staying with her, it's my understanding, as was a carer. Um, but we know that, if there's a will, there's a way for any three-letter agency or more letters from any agency that wants to silence her. They have a way. Especially, it is very suspicious with the release of the documents. It's very suspicious. I don't know, so I don't know how to answer that, but I hear you. Hey,
Mhm.
a quick question, because I know we're now into an hour and 15 minutes. So, learning from you and from Sean, do you want to answer questions from the audience for a couple of minutes before we part?
Absolutely. The more challenging, the better.
Okay, guys, it's up to you now. If you have a question, just let's do it Sean Atwood way. Put a Q in your comment if you have a question for our wonderful Professor Hamamoto. I'll give you guys oh, that's interesting. Look at this, Daryl.
Okay.
Got kicked off the internet after my comments. That's what
Uh-oh.
they're doing to people who are talking about this subject.
Okay. Well, hopefully we didn't rouse their suspicion.
I think we're long past arousing their suspicion.
Well, that's why I try to talk about sitcoms and something seemingly mindless because that seems to throw them off.
So, Lorraine has an interesting comment. They try and break all our souls. That's how strong we are. They are scared. Do you think that, quote, they are scared?
They are scared and they're protective of their privilege. There is a concept in German. It's called Seele Mord, Selle, which means soul. It's called a soul murder. And there's a book about it that theorizes how families themselves, parents, are engaged in soul destroying behavior. And we see this pattern repeated over and over again. It might have been even the case of Virginia Roberts, who at a very young age was having problems in the family. And a lot of
Yeah.
this sex transportation or human transportation that goes on, from what I've read of the data, the hard data, not the speculative YouTube data, that over 30% of the perpetrators of putting these people into human transportation networks are family members themselves. It comes from the family
Yeah,
to a
that's a
large
good point.
percentage. It's not some evil guy in a trench coat drooling standing on the corner. It could be your own uncle, your own father, your own mother.
Yeah, that's a good
It's
point.
as
So this
sad as
question,
that is. Pardon me?
yeah, so this question from Tink123. What does the professor know about the Alpha and Omega AI systems that Elon Musk told us all about, i.e., their magic money computers?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of that AI system, but if Elon Musk is involved with it, I'm distrustful of it inherently.
Ditto. Okay.
He
From
might be good in certain areas, but not he doesn't get a blank check,
from
Elon Musk.
Roxy 405, do you believe we are making any real progress in taking this network of transportation down? Can it be eradicated?
Evil can never be eradicated. Lucifer will be part of the human experience so long as they're human beings, but it can be reduced and it can be brought under control. And and if it does get under control, it's because Kirby Sommers is writing about this, and there is a growing public who aren't putting up with it anymore, and they're very vocal about it. And let me ask Kirby very quickly, since from the time when you were first writing this about people like J.E. and Ghislaine Maxwell, and you were like the lone voice in the wilderness, tell me, did you ever imagine that the public would be so massively awakened in just a matter of years?
Well, it's funny because just yesterday I uploaded a podcast and I was expressing my dissatisfaction with the general public, not our audience clearly,
Mhm.
because our audience is, as you say, sophisticated and they're in the know. but I think that the public at large still has a lot to learn. What I hear from the people who follow our work is that when they tell their families, they're they're tone deaf. They just think automatically that that person is, quote, a conspiracy theorist, right?
I see.
And I think we have to remind everyone that the word conspiracy, the term conspiracy theory, came about when people began to question uh, the the results of the JFK assassination in the what was the report called? You know,
The Warren
the Warren
Commission.
Commission. Yes.
Yeah.
So after the Warren Commission was presented to the public as a way to bring closure, like they have tried to do with the JE thing time and time again, to bring closure to the world about what I call, I have to take a breath because this is going to be hard for me to say, what I call an SNUFF film and human unalivement on national television in front of the public, this satanic thing done with overturn, I mean, in front of our eyes. So when the Warren Commission was not accepted by the public, well, first of all, about 100 people were immediately unalived. Immediately.
Hmm.
Anybody who wanted to share information, you're gone. You don't exist.
Yes.
And then, so that term came into our everyday use, I suppose, because they pushed it out through their Mockingbird media. And anybody who didn't believe in their very expensive study, I'm using that word in quotes, is going to be, is, you're a conspiracy theorist, and that stays with us to present day.
Hmm.
Therefore, I thought, okay, well, most of the people who follow our work also, I think, unless they're on my Substack, right, or they hear you and and certain and Sean, who's talked about Savile and a lot of other things,
Hmm.
um, they do. Most people kind of believe, let's say, the narrative that the JE is, quote, a one-off. I think it's
Hmm.
only recently that they're beginning to open their minds, at least within
Huh.
our community, that,
Uh-huh.
oh, okay, this is not a one-off. This is a continuation, but not everyone, I don't think. Not
Right.
everyone.
Hmm.
But there has been, clearly, because of your channel and our just unrelenting work, I think that there are more people. However, I am a little, like when you said earlier today that you thought when Patel and Bondi, when they show themselves to be acting in good faith, I want to say no, they're not acting in good faith, and they're not going to be. And I just don't see that from any party, either the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. I just don't see that. They didn't show it, and let's call it the first document drop. However, yeah, I mean, there's more awareness, clearly. But look, we have to use code language on this platform to discuss this. What does that say about our freedom of speech and our ability to be transparent? I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for transparency. I don't think it's coming. But however, let's go to this question by Cassandra Morrison. Why would she unalive herself if the husband was that abusive? Wouldn't Virginia have been concerned the kids would be his next target?
Well, I can't really address that question because I'd have to get into her head. She
Right,
might have been driven to such desperation that she felt nowhere out, but that's just speculation on my part.
right.
Um, so I prefer not to guess about it.
No, I agree. We would have to know what was going on in her mind in a
Hmm.
way to hello,
Hello.
Professor Hamamoto.
Hi.
Well, okay, so I think that we have covered a lot of ground, and
Mhm.
I cannot thank you enough for being my very first live guest.
You're welcome. It's an honor.
You know, it's I remember when somebody reached out to me in my comment section, oh, there's this man, his name is Professor Hamamoto many years ago. He's looking for you. And I thought, okay, well, who are you? And then from there on, I call you my brother from another mother.
I know.
So with that, Professor, I'm going to say goodbye to the crowd, and I'm going to end the stream. And guys, we're looking forward to see your comments. I know a lot of stuff is going to happen in the follow up when people watch this later today. However, this is not the first time Professor Hamamoto will be on the show, and we will keep you guys posted. Okay, everybody, goodbye. Bye, Professor.
Goodbye. Godspeed.
Godspeed to you. Bye bye.